Oh, well, hello there. I see you're admiring the clean internals of our little John Deere 430 standard transmission case. I think we're about ready to start reassembling our transmission. I'd love to tell you that it's as simple as just throwing everything back in here the way we took it apart, but that's not the case. There's a couple particulars we got to pay attention to, some bearing preloads, some shims for adjustment. It's going to help prevent us to have a growly transmission and some premature gear wear. So we're going to start with our what's called our cone point adjustment, which involves our main drive pinion that comes through this opening. There are some shims in a recess that's back here that go behind the cup for that bearing. We're going to do some measurements. We're going to set that as our first step. I'll walk you through it. So why don't we get started? As we get ready to reassemble our transmission, I want to do just a quick note on the bearings. Original bearings, for instance, this is the one that slides over our pinion shaft, rides on our pinion. This way I believe it goes in there. Anyhow, our original bearings will have a number stamped into them the majority of the time. In this instance, it's a Timken. I believe that's an HM804848 on the back. You can still get these bearings new from John Deere. John Deere part number JD8907. You'll find on the new bearing that same number, the HM804848. These are a Koyo bearing made in Japan. I'm sure Japan makes good stuff. This Timken was made in the US. And if you're a little bit of a stickler, I guess I'm thinking of this as a American-made tractor, and I'd have a hard time putting Japanese bearings in it if I didn't have to. So you can do a little search with that Timken number, cross-reference it, and there are still a lot of sources out there that have new old stock, in this case Timken bearings, HM804848, made in USA. So I guess I feel a little bit better about putting an American-made bearing back into an American-made tractor. Again, maybe the Japanese one's even better than what these were back in the day. But for what it's worth, we're going back American. And that's all I have to say about bearings. Step 1, we are going to make our pinion cone point adjustment in our transmission case. The end of our pinion, the gears have a taper to them. You continue that taper, it comes to the point of a cone. And the point of that cone needs to be in the very center of where the ring gear will ride in the back of our transmission case. So those two gears mesh together happily, kind of in a sweet spot, so there's no grinding, growling, no wear. To achieve that measurement, behind the bearing cone and cup are some shims that go between this bearing cup and the transmission case. And depending on how many shims we put in there, makes the depth vary of our pinion. To figure out what depth to make it, we are going to use this fancy tool I had made up, which has a center to end measurement of 2.782 inches. So we'll write that 2.782 over here. John Deere has that tool as an AM452T. I could never find one of those, so I had one of my own made. Don't get to use it very often, but it's important to have it when I need it. On the end of our pinion is a measurement that is 2787, if you can see that. So 2787. If we subtract those two, it should be 5 thousandths. So what we need to have when we have everything lined up in our transmission case is a distance of 5 thousandths between those two surfaces. So I'll get everything sort of lined up in our transmission, put our gauge in there, we'll measure it out, and see how close we are just by using our original shim pack. And that'll tell us if we need to add or subtract anything by measuring. Well, our first step for our cone point adjustment is going to actually be prepping our transmission case a little bit with the cup of the cone and cup bearing for the front of our pinion. I'm going to tap him in the front of the case here. Now our next step is going to be similar. We're going to drive the opposite cup into the back of the transmission case back this way. But before we do that, we are going to take a set of shims and put them behind the cup in there first. I'm going to take this set here and just start at what's going to be 30 thousandths instead of trying to guess it and think that we'll kind of hit it right on. If I measure this right around, it says 29.5, 30 roughly with that. So we'll get our bearing out here. It's a beauty. And we are going to move around to the back of the transmission case. I don't know what you can see in there, but there we go. I'm going to put our shims in there so you know where they go. Then our cup is going to go in there, and we're going to drive him in. So there, we can see on the inside here, our cup is up against the edge. Maybe barely make out our shims in there. Now we're going to advance our pinion up into its opening here. As I move him forward, I'm going to take a transmission gear, one of our sliding gears, set it up on the shaft there, simply to act as a friction point. When I go to tighten and loosen the nut up here, I can wedge a piece of wood or something against the gear teeth, and that should give me a little leverage. But then with that in place, I can buzz up front. Now we have to put our bearing on there, and then our nut. Manual says to tighten this up just until you start to feel some drag. Okay, a little wood wedge is in place. Should keep our shaft from wanting to turn as much. We can take our 1 1/8 wrench. Kind of say that that's where we're starting to feel a little bit of drag. So we have our pinion in place, snug down. This is where we take our special tool and put it in the openings here. Now it's a little fiddly because this is a very snug, sort of precise fit. There we go. Once we get that half in, it should go a little easier for both sides. Just like so. Now, the end, what we're going to look for is the measurement between the end and our pinion. There's going to be a gap between those two. And what we need to figure out is what the measurement of that gap is. And that's what we're going to use our little set of feeler gauges. I believe when we did our math earlier, it told us we're looking for 5 thousandths. And according to this gauge, there's 4 thousandths on that little guy, then 6 thousandths on the bigger one. So 4 fits in there, but 6 also fits in there. So that's still a little too much space, too much muchness. So here's 7 and 9. 9 goes in there too. Okay, so I cannot get an 11 thousandths to go in there, but I can get a 9 in. But here I have a 10 thousandths gauge, and that one we can get in there the whole way. So I'm going to say we have a gap of 10 thousandths at the moment. We need a gap of 5 thousandths. So we need to add 5 thousandths worth of shims behind this bearing cup. So we'll go ahead and pull all this out. Take our pinion out, take our bearing cup out, add that 5 thousandths shim to the back of that, and remeasure everything. Our bearing cup's back out. Before we go and put everything back together, for hopefully the last time, for our cone point setting, we're going to recheck our math. I see on the end of my pinion my etching of 2787. We know our gauge from the center to the end is 2782 for a difference of 5 thousandths. Originally behind my bearing cup I had 30 thousandths of shims, which created a gap of 10 thousandths between the end of our pinion and our gauge. 10 thousandths minus the 5 thousandths that we want means I needed to add 5 thousandths worth of shims to our shim pack. Hopefully you're still following me, and hopefully what I'm saying is making sense. So what we are going to do is see if I added a 5 thousandths shim in here correctly. They should read 35 thousandths. Perfect. That's what we want. That should give us our desired cone point setting. So we're going to go ahead and put the shim pack in there with the 3 10s and 1 5. Tap our bearing cup back in, just like we did before. I'll spare you that part over again. We have everything all set up again, just as we did before. Only difference being we have an extra 5 thousandths shim behind this bearing cup in our case. So I've got my gauge. I'm going to start with the 4,000, 6,000 gauge. The 4 should go in, which it does easily. The 6 does not. So the 6 does not want to go in. That's what we want. Let's try the 5 and the 7. The 5 should go in nicely, which it does. Of course, the 7 shouldn't. If the 6 didn't, 7,000 should not fit in there. So we're going to call that a win. Success. We have our cone point set. This tool can come out and go back in storage for another decade or so. It doesn't get used often, but when it's needed, it's very handy. But pinion cone point set. Happy with that. Now we're going to come up and set our preload on our bearing on the front up here. So we're going to get our dial indicator out, get our play set so our bearing's happy on both ends. That's going to be step 2. Setting our pinion bearing preload isn't as labor intensive as the cone point adjustment, but we're still going to use shims and it still involves math. So there's that. The book says, our manual, start with 35 thousandths of shims. You know, these are the shims we took from the front of our pinions, I should say. There are 10 thousandths, 5 thousandths, and 2 thousandths shims available. I've kind of separated them out. It says to start with 35 thousandths. We got 3 10s, 35 thousandths, add a 5. I'm going to add 15 more for a total of 50 thousandths. Simply because whenever I've done this in the past, the 35 thousandths is never enough. So I'm going to start with 50. What we're going to do is add our shims on our pinion shaft here. We're going to take our little washer. So we've got our shim pack in place, put in our bearing, tightened our nut. Now I'm going to move our pinion back and forth here. We're going to watch our dial indicator. I've got it at 0. Move it forward, backwards. There's a little bit of play in there depending on where you set it, but if I rotate, there we go. Really, you could say there's, let's say 6/1000, 6.5 of play back and forth. So we've got our shim pack, 0.50 that we put in there to start. We have play of 6/1000. Manual says we want to subtract that. So 0.044. Then the manual says you want to take an additional 5/1000, so minus 0.005. That's going to take you to 0.039 is what we're after. Now, given that we've only got 10s, I think it was 5s, and then 2/1000 shims, we can probably do the 3 10s, so that'd be 30, plus a 5, and I think I have 2 of the 20/1000s to give us, well, that might give us right on, 0.039. So that's what we will do. That is going to load our bearing within the necessary, what is it, 0.004 to 0.006 inches of preload that the manual calls for. And that will, once I get all that squared away, set up our pinion. We pulled the shim pack back out from the front of our pinion, took out 15/1000 worth of shims, added in 4/1000. That should give us a total of right around 39. Yep, 39/1000. That's what we're after. That's going to set the proper preload on the bearings, meaning it's going to seat them nice and snug against the bearing cups, not allow any lateral play back and forth on our pinion shaft. Keep everything nice, happy, cozy in there. So those settings are complete. After the pinion, we have to go back to the differential and do some back and forth adjustments, putting our new bearings in. Some work to do there. So we're halfway done, got the pinion done, differentials up next.